Good morning, and thank you for joining us. This is 4 Easy Ways to Grow Mushrooms at Home, presented by Cotter. I am Ashley C. I'm CFSA's Communications Manager, and I will be the workshop host and managing the chat. Please feel free. I see y'all are already in the chat and introducing yourselves and talking about mushrooms, which is great. Feel free to put any questions that you have for Trad throughout the workshop in there, and we will circle up at the end. There should be about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Do remember our conference community agreements and keep those in mind as you communicate. If you haven't reviewed them yet, the succinct way is just be nice to each other. Thank you to our session sponsor, which is Gaia Herbs. You can check them out in the trade show, and we actually have a short little video from them to play for you now. So let's get that started.
The sound of the birds in harmony with the bees buzzing, everybody starting their day, just fills a breath of immense energy and potential. And it's that moment in the day, listening, observing, breathing in that energy that we try to put back into how we grow the plants and ultimately what goes into every product.
All right, without further ado, y'all aren't here for me, so I'll hand it over to Trad.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me here. All righty, buddy. Thank you for coming to my talk this morning on Saturday. It's a beautiful day out today. My name's Cotter. Tonight, we're going to talk about 4 easy ways to grow mushrooms at home. This is one of my favorite lectures. Obviously, you wouldn't be here if I titled it 101 Difficult Ways to Grow Mushrooms Expensively. So let's just get started. I have a lot of slides, and I want to leave some room and time for some questions at the end. First of all, mushrooms create heat, carbon dioxide, and they sweat, so it's like an animal turned inside out. So everybody raise your right hand. Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, to yourself, I am a mushroom. Good. Now you've taken the oath, and now you have to start thinking like a mushroom if you want to grow mushrooms as you try to get inside their little chemical brains. I always encourage people who want to grow mushrooms to go out mushroom hunting. It's a good way of immersing yourself in the experience. You can learn a lot about mushroom cultivation by just watching them in the wild, watching them grow. I collect a lot of mushrooms out in the wild for our lab. But we have to know, if we want to grow mushrooms, we have to know how they start. So mushrooms produce spores. They produce millions of spores.
Hey, Trad.
Yeah.
Let's have you go into, we can see your slides, but we can't see them big. So let's go ahead and go into, I think if you hit slideshow and then click current slide, we'll be able to, I know you have a lot of slides, so we want to make sure that folks can see them.
Let's see. So stop sharing.
Nope, you should be able in that orange toolbar at the top to go up to slideshow.
No, there's no toolbar at all.
Go ahead and click escape, and that should get you out of your full presentation.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah.
So hit what? Current slide?
Yep, going up to that orange toolbar, slideshow, and then current slide ought to do it.
Right here?
Yeah.
Is that better?
I still see all of the slides, and I don't see your main one.
I'm going to stop sharing. Hold on a second.
Sounds good.
Let me try something else. We'll get it.
We'll get there. As our T's and copies kick in, we'll get there.
I think I got it. I figured it out.
There, that's perfect.
All right. We're good. Right back on track. Don't produce seeds, they produce spores. also do mushroom identification. You can take a mushroom and put it down on aluminum foil, and it'll produce a spore print in a couple hours to overnight. Now, since there's so many spores out there, you don't really plant or spawn spores because those spores are everywhere, and there's really no advantage to that. So what we do is we take the spores, we germinate them in the lab, and produce mycelium. All right, so this is what spawn is essentially. All right, spawn is mated mycelium, so this is able to outcompete or outrun the spores that are in nature. And so this is what you're purchasing a mushroom culture to get started. This is what mycelium looks like when it is under the microscope when it's growing. You can see the active hot tips, and they're burning through the environment. So they're sweating enzymes and they're feeding on their environment. A mushroom doesn't fruit. You don't see a mushroom until it runs out of space. So it's called colonization. So when you put spawn in the environment or on a food source, it has to colonize it first, and then when it hits up, when you see a mushroom. All right. As long as you're feeding a mushroom culture or mycelium, it's never going to fruit. It's just going to keep colonizing or conquering that little territory that you feed it. So those are pink oysters in the previous slide. These are golden oyster mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms are some of the easiest to grow. And I do have to tell you a little bit about the environment. The mushrooms need light to produce the pigmentation here, and also to develop medicinal properties such as vitamin D. They're the vitamin D. So they need either bright indirect light, like shaded light, or LED lights are really, really good. And fluorescent works, but LEDs work really, really well. And I'll also show you there's different containers you can use to fruit different mushrooms. You don't have to use bags. You can use like these nursery pots, which I like. You can rinse them out, use them again. And let's start with log and stump cultivation first. This is probably the easiest way to get started, one of the easiest ways. So there's two different options here. We've got sawdust spawn and plug spawn. A bag of plugs, let's say 100 plugs, will do about linear feet of fresh cut logs, and sawdust would do about 100 linear feet of fresh cut logs. And the cost comparison is the sawdust is much cheaper if sawdust, and you can find the same species in either form. If you're just doing a couple logs and want to get started, try the plugs. If you want to do a lot of logs, go ahead with the sawdust because it's much more economical. The plugs look like this. You'll see mycelium here, and when you get these in the mail, sometimes they're the outside. You won't see the mycelium. You can just leave it for a few days, and it'll all turn all white again. There you see little dowels. And so what you want to do with logs is you want to start with fresh cut logs. This is typically hardwood logs. So you're looking at oak, maple, sweet gum, poplar, beech, birch, ash. They have to be fresh cut within a month or two, because if you use older wood, another fungus probably already has it. It's already colonizing it. So you have to use fresh cut logs. You're going to drill holes. The size depends on the plugs or the sawdust. What you're going to do is you're going to space those holes out in a diamond pattern all the way around the bark. You're not going to use firewood because you need bark here, and firewood is old and seasoned. And then you're just going to tap in the plugs or inject the sawdust spawn. And what happens is once you put the spawn in these holes, the fungus is going to radiate outwards in a three-dimensional pattern, and it's going to try to find the other colony coming the other way, and then they're going to all fuse forces and take over the log. Most people use wax, some kind of melted wax, beeswax, cheese wax. We use soy wax to melt and just cover the holes. What this does is it protects the spawn from drying out, and also protects some things like that from getting it. and the wax falls off. You may not see the wax in a week or two. It only takes a couple days for the into the environment. If you're off the grid, if you're off the grid and don't have a drill, you can use a chainsaw and just make little chainsaw cuts. If you're using chainsaw cuts, you can just use sawdust spawn and insert it into the chainsaw cuts. And again, wax it over. Now, if this is called a spawn run, so after you spawn the logs, they have to sit there for 6 to 8 months. And that's when the colonization is occurring. After the colonization has occurred, the end of the log turn white. You can soak them. Mushrooms are 94% water. And so if the logs get really, really dry, what you can do is you can soak them. The logs absorb moisture and you can force fruit them, right? I typically only soak about 10% of my logs at any given time because in between the flushes takes about 8 to 10 weeks. So once they fruit, they rest about 8 to 10 weeks. They're dry again. You soak another 10%. So if you soak 10% every week, you get down to the end of the, let's say 100 logs, you go back and soak another 10. If you only have 10 logs, you soak 1 a week. So this is the end of a log. When you see this, you know that's the mycelium that has reached the end of the log. That's a very good sign. That means if it rains or if you soak it, it's going to fruit. Now, there's different strains of shiitake. Now we start with shiitake on logs, and these are categorized into cold, warm, and wide range. So wide range is spring and fall. Warm is summer, cold is winter, obviously. And you'd only soak them or they would fruit just during those temperature windows. So if you want shiitake mushrooms year round, you would have to get a little bit of each spawn strain. And you would only soak them or water them during the time that they are ready to fruit. In other words, that temperature window. Now, after you spawn them, if it's really dry out, they're not getting rained on, you're going to want to water them like once a week until you see this at the end of the logs. And there you have it. A week later, after you soak your logs, little baby shiitakes come out. They come out really fast, and then they mature in just a few days. If you've cut a tree, you've got a little stump left behind. There are mushrooms that prefer to fruit off of stumps, even little off of buried wood, like a little fence post method. This is, we use this very commonly for lion's mane, this type of method. Works really, really well. Reishi mushrooms also fruit from buried wood. These are logs that are inoculated and buried, and they put a little plastic like hoop tunnel over this. You obviously don't have to do this in the Southeast. It's humid enough. And they just emerge from the buried wood. Maitake, or hen of the woods. This is one of my favorite. This is from a very large tree. If you were to bury little rounds and things like that, you could get a little baby Griffola or a Maitake hen of the woods right in your backyard. Now, Maitake is very specific to oak, very specific to the strain that you get. Shiitake and oyster, they're omnivorous. They can eat just about any hardwood, but Maitake is very specific to oak. So you cannot put it on sweet gum, maple, cherry. All right, so just make sure before you inoculate, ask your spawn supplier, you know, what wood does this grow on? What does it not grow on? So you're not wasting all your time. And here's a little baby Maitake fruiting from a little round that we buried at the farm. Very pretty little cluster. On fallen trees, very large fallen trees. Obviously, you can't lug those back to the house. On trails, you can take a little chainsaw and just nick the tree and pack in sawdust spawn for chicken of the woods. and you can have these chicken of the woods growing, well, in your woods, right? All right, so log cultivation, very easy. I would recommend shiitakes on logs. They don't have a lot of pest problems. Oyster mushrooms on logs tend to get a lot of insects. So the second method we're going to cover is mushrooms on wood chips and compost. Now the wood chips you want need to be coarse. You don't want sawdust. So you want something that looks like this down here in the bottom left. I get it from tree trimmers and arborists, also from power line companies. But if you're using power line companies, you need to tell them, like, listen, I can't use conifer. I need hardwood. So when you get into a run of hardwood along a tree line, you can bring it to me. So we do something called cardboard sheeting with sawdust spawn. This is right out of my book. And these are layers of cardboard. You can do this too in the full sun in a gardening area where you use the cardboard to basically suffocate the grass like Bermuda. Instead of using herbicides, you can put down layers of cardboard and then spawn wood chips and another layer of cardboard, more wood chips, and maybe some leaves or straw. And you can make these little mushroom beds. All right, and then you can plant plants around them to shade them out. In the woods, it would look something like this. You do not need these crates. These are just some recycled crates I got from the BMW plant in Greenville. You can use logs as the borders. You don't need any borders. You can just make mounds of wood chips. And this is King Stropharia here. This is one of the best wood recyclers, soil creators that I have. Sorry, I got a cold. King Stropharia, the cap, because it's kind of a darker color, white stem, very easy to be. It's also called the garden giant. The reason I call it the garden giant is because it will basically, for every inch of mulch depth, you can get an inch in cap diameter and up to 2 feet. So if you this can produce a very large mushroom. So if you're just mulching around your house in your garden and you've got 2 or 3 inches of mulch, you're going to get 2 or 3 inch mushroom caps, which is fine. But if you do 6, 8, 9, 10 inches, you can get these large Stropharia like this that almost look like portobellos. And then they'll pop up. It's a native mushroom to the southeast, so they'll naturalize. They'll produce a lot of spores. Those will float off. This is some that went in our front yard. We did not put them there, so they just found their own home. So they will naturalize wherever there's wood chips. So those are on wood chips. King Stropharia fruit in the spring and the fall. A bluet is a mushroom that fruits when it starts to get cold, like right now. We should start to see bluets coming out. It prefers the barkier material, lignin rich, and also a lot of leaves. It also likes composted. And there's a third one on compost. This is livestock manure, almond portobello. This is a tropical. On this, let's say in May, and in your garden, you add composted livestock manure to your garden, whatever, or all shading out your garden. These mushrooms will up underneath the canopy of your vegetables in the summer. And it's a wonderful tasting portobello relative, has the flavor of almond extract, really good mushroom. Recycling aids. So this is absolutely the easiest way to grow mushrooms at home. This is fun. It's cool for the family. Anybody can do it. I teach this at schools. If you've got, after this class, if you're in your kitchen, you walk in there and you see all the cool things that you can grow mushrooms on here: spent coffee grounds, cereal boxes, shredded office paper, old clothes, all of it. The fact is 30% of household waste can be used for mushrooms. 60 to 80% of us or school is suitable to grow mushrooms. And this keeps stuff out of the landfill. You can grow mushrooms, you can eat the mushrooms, you can compost the media, soil. Here's our coffee bucket that we at home. See the coffee grounds, even the filters. And you would just take them out on day 2 when they're cool and drained a little bit. Paper towel rolls. And there's the spawn. We just sprinkle it in as we need it. So if you get a bag of sawdust spawn, the sawdust spawn for last up to a year in the fridge. We just open up the bag, take a little bit, sprinkle it away. I would say 1 bag of spawn would do 5 5-gallon buckets. This is a one of our coffee cultivator kits. Comes with a little bit of spawn. There's the coffee grounds here, and then we just cracked it, and eventually they would just go for the oxygen. So we just added the coffee grounds daily, and then it turns all white. Remember, mushrooms fruit, when they run out of space, reach the top, they had no option. They had to fruit mushrooms, so it actually pushed the top off of this jar, this little pickle jar. You would just mist it as they come out. They like moisture. So you can use shredded paper here. Right from our office, we put it inside of egg cartons, fiber egg cartons. Ready. We use here for this one because a pink oyster will eat just about anything. And these are the babies. You know how long this took? This only took about 7 to 10 days. So we put this in a plastic bag, wet it, and then it had high humidity, and all these little baby pink ones came out. In fact, too many came out. This is called overpinning. And the big ones that come out first actually get most of the nutrients. All these little babies, you see them drying and shriveling up, are just aborting. And what that means is that there's just way too many mushrooms for this battery. So it can't support all these little babies. So all the other little ones shrivel up and channel their energy to the big ones. And then there you have it. You've got some very large pink oyster mushrooms growing off of shredded paper waste out of a cardboard carton. Such an easy thing to do at home, super easy with some of the waste. So, you can recycle the cardboard. You can, put it in the recycling bin, but you can also do this, sheeting like inside a big storage container too. You can just wet the cardboard, put it in there, sprinkle the spawn, and just fill a storage container, and it will do the same thing. It'll just fruit mushrooms all inside that container. This is a mushroom that I cloned from the supermarket. I just took stems from an oyster mushroom. You could do this. I do this all the time. I have one right here. Nope, I don't. You can take a oyster mushroom stem and roll it up in wet cardboard and actually clone it. This is in my book, and then you can shred this into coffee, and then the coffee grounds start growing. Then you can use some of that coffee to make more spawn. So it's almost an infinite source of spawn at that point. I love doing this. I do this out of the country. I do it in Jamaica, and I've done it in Haiti when I don't have a lab. I've also done it on pizza boxes, such as this. These are filled with coffee grounds and paper, and I stack 3 boxes together, and they completely fused. All 3 boxes fused together, and then these little baby blue oyster mushrooms pop out the box. So not only are they fun projects, it keeps debris out of the landfill, but also produces at the same time, and soil eventually. We'll get to that in a minute. Oh, look, here's some old jeans that I had. I sprinkled some oyster mushroom spawn in there. They colonized the genes, and then the oyster mushrooms just popped right out of the genes. The genes are made out of cotton, which is cellulose. So, and then you mix your spawn into, this is wood shavings from a cabinet maker, and I just soaked them in hot water for an hour or two, drained it, added the spawn, and this bucket fruited in 7 to 10 days after this. It turned all white. So again, I'm looking for opportunities, neighbors, maybe somebody who has something that is a waste byproduct. I go to the feed store and I just look for things, farmers that have soybean hulls and things that they really don't want or need. And all you have to do is just soak in a little warm water, drain it, add a mushroom culture, and then you've got mushrooms a couple of weeks later. It's very, very simple. So we got our pink oysters, we got our blue, we got our golden, and now we're going to get into some pasteurized substrates. But I just want to let you know, if you've never grown mushrooms before, especially oyster mushrooms, this is coming out of the bag only 3 weeks after we made it. This slide to this one is only about 6 to 12 hours later. So they grow really, really fast. And some of them get left behind here. You can't let them out. And I'll have a talk tomorrow morning about pasteurized substrates that'll go into this in more detail. But today I'm just going to breeze in. You've got golden oyster mushrooms. So now we're talking about cultivating on agricultural plants and weeds. Coffee, cereal straw. Cereal straw is probably where I'm going to recommend everyone go as a beginner. You can also get cotton waste. You can get cottonseed hulls at a feed store. You may have to special order it. But then you start looking around and say, hey, well, there's corn waste, there's corn cob litter, there's all these different types of. One of the things they have to do first is make sure that the particle size is small enough where it's dense. All right, if you just have a bale of wheat straw with really loose straw, it's probably not going to work out too well. It might colonize, but it's not going to fruit well. So on the right, you see straight out of the bale. On the left, you see it shredded, and it's darker because I soaked it in water, but look how fluffy it is. That's what you want. You want a nice, small, fluffy media for your mushrooms. I've also used hemp. This is hemp bedding. And this is full of cellulose. Right now, it's a little more expensive, but honestly, I didn't have to shred it, and the yields were double what it was on straw. So I'm willing to pay more for a media that gives me a higher yield, and also that is already pre-shredded. I don't have to do any of that. I don't need a shredder. I don't need the time, the maintenance of that machine, the emissions, everything. So you take shredded straw or hemp or cotton waste. All you have to do is soak it in hot water for 1 to 2 hours. And if these are food grade barrels, always, if you're doing this at home, just use a big, huge stock pot. I do it all the time, and with experimental stuff, and just soak it in hot water out, and you can make a little bag or 2 little bags or 1 little bucket, once a week. So don't let this barrel thing, scare you. This is based. We just soaked it in barrels. We put it on a clean target. And then all you have to do after that is spawn it. You mix it with spawn on the tarp or on a table or in a bag. If you're just doing a little bit in the kitchen, just shake up a little bit of spawn and then compress it and tie a knot, poke some holes. This is in a tube. We'll talk about this more tomorrow on pasteurized media for more small scale commercial stuff. And then what happens is if you put it in a container, it better have holes because mushrooms need oxygen, right? You can't just stick it into a closed container. That mycelium needs to breathe. So if you put it in a bag, you poke holes every 6 inches, just a little knife slit, and the CO2 can come out and the oxygen can come in. And it has to take over. Remember, it has to go through a spawn run. And there you have it. You see this totally white colonized columns or bags. And you see the holes kind of spread out 6 to 8 inches apart. And then once they do that, you spray the holes, mushrooms come out of the holes. And then once you pick those off, they'll flush. So you pick them, they'll rest for 2 to 3 weeks, and they'll come out again, and they'll come out again. And the mushrooms get smaller and smaller. So these are some columns I did. This is just out in the woods with a humidity tent in a wooden frame. There's really nothing on, there was no infrastructure here. This was in the fall. You can see I have a jacket on. And look at the production I'm getting off of these. With like, you know, I had heat in here for a while and I just turned it off. Just started growing cold season oysters outside frame. So grow with the season. You can grow cold season oyster mushrooms outside. You can grow warm ones like the golden oyster, the pink one during the summer. This is growing in little nursery pots. Now look at this. It's outside in the dirt on a little plastic sheet of plastic and waste. And this only took about 12 to 14 days to come out. It was very, very quick. Once you pasteurize media in hot water, you can just dump it into containers that have holes like this. And 3 weeks later, this is a warm blue variety. It's one of my favorites. They're starting to come out of the holes in 3 weeks. And from the top bin to the middle bin, it's 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That difference is only about 3 to 4 days at the most. 4 days at the most. So they grow really, really fast. It's a lot of food, a lot of protein on agricultural waste very quickly. You can use buckets like this. I like the bins. These larger bins you would do during the winter because mushrooms produce heat as they colonize. So if you use really large bins in the summer and it's really hot, they can actually, it'll compost the middle and go anaerobic. So you can use smaller containers in the summer and bigger ones or larger ones in the winter. In our fruiting room in the winter, I put, you know, plants to help metabolize the carbon dioxide. That keeps the oxygen in the room, and we don't have to vent in or bring in cold air in the winter. So I like this setup. If you were growing inside, you can get one of those little mini greenhouses that are like a rack with a mini greenhouse, like a zippered thing. And you can put mushroom bags in there with a few ferns, and then it will just be like its own little ecosystem inside. You know, high humidity, oxygen, a little bit of light. After your mushrooms are done, we like to compost them. So we put them outside, but I mean, they'll flush maybe 4 or 5 times indoors. And then once they're done, we move them outside to compost. But you know what? They don't stop. These are elm oysters that are fruiting outdoors. They just keep going. So we eat these. We weren't selling those to the market, but we were just picking them. Nothing wrong with these. And then here's behind our building. They just don't stop. So we get a couple more flushes outdoors. Once they hit a lot of oxygen, they go crazy. And then we compost. So one thing you have to know is as the mushrooms are flushing, the first flush is usually the biggest, and then they start, the yield goes down about 50% per flush. So if you get, let's say 10 pounds per storage container on the first flush, you get about 5 pounds on the second, 2.5 pounds on the third, 1.25 on the fourth, and then the mushrooms get smaller and smaller. So here they are, and the battery is pretty much depleted, but there's still media in there. There's still mycelium in there. So what goes after that? So then we start looking at possibly composting it. So we compost it with worms. There's a lot of organisms that are attracted to octanol, and mushrooms produce octanol. That is a chemoattractant and it attracts mosquitoes, butterflies, bees, slugs, fungus gnats. You'll find that out quick. If you grow oyster mushrooms outside in the summer, you're going to see a lot of fungus gnats. So that's why I like to grow shiitakes on logs during the summer. You can grow oyster mushrooms on logs in the winter. I would definitely do cold season oyster logs outdoors, but may advise you to stay away from warm oysters during the summer because they look like this. They get very buggy. And here we are with worms. Worms are highly attracted to myceliated substrates such as oyster mushroom blocks. So that's what we do with the majority of our waste that comes out of the farm. And here we go. Here's my first cake. My first batch of worms. I brought a pound of red wigglers like 17 years ago. Stuck them and they immediately went to work. This is what I got. From here to the next slide is only about 8 weeks. Look like this fluffy, nice compost. Good for mixing into a garden. But I left it even longer. And about 20 weeks, it looks like coffee grounds. So this is an amazing soil supplement. So you've gone from, wood chips, in the garden. This is what happens to your soil too with a King Stropharia. If you colonize that, it vectors worms, and you're building soil at the same time. The worms are leaving castings behind, and that's fertilizing your plants. You've got leftover fruiting bags from your, oyster mushrooms, and you compost them with worms, and you're getting soil like this. I mean, this is what your garden needs. This is huge. I mean, this is gold here. So this is the favorite part about the farm when we do tours is we get to that point just shocked and fascinated by the soil that is produced at the end by these worms. After we harvest mushrooms, we make mushroom extracts, we do all these things, and ultimately we feed the blocks to the worms and we get that compost. Is a huge bonus. I'm going to talk a few minutes about just some pests. We have 2 organic certifications, so I want to make sure that you do not use any pesticides, at least chemical pesticides. So I'm going to suggest some biological, mostly for insects and some microbial, but mostly the insects. And it's going to be mostly fungus gnats that are an issue, and also some pleasing beetles, which I'll show you. So for the adults, you can use something called Botanigard. It's been upgraded to Mycotrol. That's Mycotrol. That is OMRI approved. I think Botanigard had some petroleum distillates in it, but it's Bavaria. And it mummifies flying insects and some hard-bodied insects, as you see here. So you can start with Mycotrol with the adults, but I would also recommend Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, which is commonly sold as mosquito bits or mosquito dunks. You can soak this in water and then spray your straw or media or even your wood chips, drench it, and it's a larvicide specifically for fungus gnats and mosquitoes. It won't hurt butterflies, it won't hurt bees, it doesn't work that way. So it's very specific to fungus gnats and mosquitoes. This works really great. So the Mycotrol, the Bacillus handles the if you have an outbreak of fungus gnats, in your bags or your bulk media. Obviously, this is for if you start to grow, a little bit on smaller commercial scale, then you can start doing stuff like this. But if you just have a couple bags at home, you pick your mushrooms young, you shouldn't have any issues. Pleasing beetles are awful. They're not pleasing at all. They're a little black, almost like little BBs, and they have a little red head. They get up into the gills, mostly oyster mushrooms. So if you're growing outdoors, especially oyster, you'll get pleasing beetles from the spring to the fall. So if you're growing just at home on the kitchen counter, some oyster mushrooms out of bags or buckets, you're probably not going to see these beetles. You're going to see some fungus gnats. But if you put those out on your patio or in your backyard, these are going to show up. And they're hard to get rid of. The only way I've found to get rid of them is to vacuum them with a wet, dry vac, the gills. The last thing you want to see is something called trichoderma. So this is a mycoparasite. It's a green mold. The only thing you can do here is to throw it out. So if you're growing on coffee grounds or straw, it typically does not show up on cardboard, but coffee grounds it shows up quite a bit. You would just throw this out and start over. And if you are using the same container, you're going to need to bleach that out really, really well. You're going to want to kill those mold spores. And if you touch this green mold, you definitely don't want to be touching, new media that day. You definitely want to clean, sanitize your hands. This is like a bomb. So definitely don't handle trichoderma and handle your spawn, in the fridge or do anything. So I like to tell people to handle green molds near the end of the day when you're all done with something. Throw it out, throw it in a compost pile far from your others, and just get rid of it. So trichoderma is a very common problem. So if you see it, don't get discouraged. I mean, we have it from time and time again, and it's just about management. It's just about running away from this problem and also disposing of it properly. Wow, I ran through like 122 slides in 45 minutes. That's my book. You can find it at Mushroom. You can find it on Amazon, and it's full of different, all these techniques and beyond. It says simple to advanced, and also experimental techniques, because what I like to do is encourage you to try different things. Obviously, I haven't tried everything. I tried, but I keep trying to experiment with new substrates. I travel a lot. Southeast, I'm very good with tropical or semi-tropical fungi. And I've grown mushrooms on just about it. So if you have the book, thank you for getting it. If you don't, check it out. But there's a lot of useful information in there. So I think I'm going to end there. Oh, also, shameless self-promotion. But if you haven't been to mushroommountain.com, check it out. It's a very large site. There's also videos and how-to videos of what I've showed you here. The log demos, recycling, composting, those videos are all there. So you can use this as a kind of a springboard to go there and check out some more stuff. And there's spawn there and a lot of cool things. I guess we could start with questions, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for the presentation, Chad. We definitely have a number of questions that came in, and there might be a few that still come in. The first one, I can put these up here on the screen. The first question from Scotty and Donna is, do you have any suggestions on what to use to get sawdust into the holes?
Yeah, we actually recommend, it's called a plunger. It's like a little, you just tap the sawdust into it, this hole, and then you just kind of, it's on a spring, so you just inject it right into the holes. It's called like a mushroom inoculator or plunger. And I mean, you can get them online. I know we carry them. So I don't like to sell from the stage, but you know, anyway, it's called a plunger, mushroom inoculator, or plunger. It's worth it. A sawdust bag and a plunger is way more economically effective than plugs if you're going to do that many. You know what I mean? It pays for itself.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. The next is Mike was asking if you have any tips on how to deal with carpenter bees getting into the plugs. Have you encountered that before?
I've never seen that. I've never had that problem. I know they sell carpenter bee traps and things like that. I can't help with that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I have no.
No worries.
Into the plug holes, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, Mike, feel free in the comments or in the chat box to put any follow-up there. But as of right now, we don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Never seen it.
Another question by Scotty and Donna is, do you have a link for spawn sources that you could suggest? Angie, who's on our staff, put a link to your website. Do you have any other go-to recommendations, or is that the one you want to stand behind?
Well, I'm completely biased, but there's others out there. And I might say there's Field and Forest. There's Fungi Perfecti. You know, but if you're looking for a regional, you know, a good regional source, we're the one in the southeast that is isolated most of our strains from the southeast. You know, so they do well in the regions. And if you're on the West Coast, I would suggest Fungi Perfecti because from the West. So, I mean, there's some validity to my answer, trying to act in an unbiased way.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're all about local here at this conference, right? So finding a source that's local to you is what makes
it's
sense.
the same thing with plants and seeds. I mean, I wouldn't order seeds that do well on the West Coast. You know what I mean? So it makes some sense.
Sure thing. Mike has another question about how long do plugs last in the fridge?
That's a good question because plugs will last for years in the fridge, but the thing what happens to them is they get soft. And you can't tap them in with a hammer, which is fine. If they get soft, you can just drill the hole just a little bit bigger and just push them in with your fingers, you know, because if you try to hit a plug that's, I don't know, I would say they would stay hard in the fridge for 6 to 8 months and then they start to soften. After that, you could just push them in with your fingers. Even they're just gonna squirt like a grape if you hit them with a hammer. So, because the 5/16 inch hole is pretty tight, you know, it's pretty tight when you hammer them in. So just drill them a little bit bigger, and you know, maybe 10 millimeters versus the 8, and then you can just push them in with your finger and just wax them. That's it. But I mean, the fungus is alive. It'll stay alive for years, but it's just the wood, you know, that gets soft.
Awesome. Another question is, which varieties grow in coffee grounds? We drink a lot of coffee.
Oyster mushrooms would be their best one. That would be, and the best ones are in the Austria Ottoman, warm blue and brown, typically. Yep.
Great. I asked our next question, which is, does it matter if the medium you're growing in is treated or non-organic? Will those chemicals be in the mushrooms?
The only concern would be heavy metals. And we've done some studies with this, and we've got a study coming out from Furman University. Yeah, I mean, adhesives, even soy-based inks are fine. You know, the glues that are in cardboard boxes, those are fine. It's really heavy metals, so I would stay away from maybe foreign box material, you know, and maybe just use indigenous, you know, boxes and things, or stuff that has no ink on it, if you want to be absolutely sure.
Gotcha. And in terms of a medium, Mike wants to know, would a burlap sack work?
No. I mean, it'll fruit if you stack enough burlap sacks on top of each other. But a lot of burlap sacks are treated with something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is, but they reek. So if they're untreated burlap, coconut fibers and things like that work for me pretty well. I'm growing a lot of mushrooms down in Jamaica on coconut fiber. You can buy those bricks and soak it in hot water and it'll expand and you can grow mushrooms on that. It's very easy.
Awesome. There's lots of thank yous coming in, just to sprinkle those along, and the questions that you've answered thus far, people are saying that's great. Katie made a note that she has used the large container method with the same boxes and it works great for oysters. What else are we getting here? George wanted to confirm or clarify rather, so you used mushroom culture and fed that to the red wigglers for worm castings?
Do I do what with the cultures?
I think they were clarifying when you showed the first red wigglers that you bought 17 years ago, and just clarifying, is that how you composted the mushroom culture?
Yeah. We, I mean, that 1 pound now that we've got compost at the farm, so we've got probably billions of red wigglers now from that 1 pound. What's interesting, they're probably all brothers and sisters, so I don't know what's going on in there. I mean, it is South Carolina.
Let's see here. Scotty just wanted you to know they're East Coast in their house, so they're sold. They'll look to your website for some spawn. Sorry if you can hear my dog barking here. George wants to know if you sell bags and if they can be reused, assuming there is no green mold.
Let's try to also sell bags. Maybe reused. I mean, our laboratory bags can be reused if there's no green mold. If you're sterilizing substrates for shiitake and lion's mane, this can be used a couple times if no green mold. I've actually done that in Jamaica because it's hard to find those bags. But regular plastic bags, I mean, you're going to be poking holes in those, so they're really hard to reuse. That's why, like, if you really want to reduce your plastic footprint here for fruiting containers, I like the little storage containers with the holes or the buckets. You know what I mean? Even nursery pots, you can rinse them out, bleach them a little bit, and then refill them. Stack them up. But I like 5-gallon buckets with holes on the side because you can put the lids on, you can stack them vertically, and they don't take up a whole lot of space.
Yeah, and that reusable component is awesome. Last question here is Scotty and Donna asking if you have a recommendation for getting started in producing for sale. We have lots of woods, no room inside, thoughts on equipment, mushrooms, etc. Thinking shiitakes and oysters.
I think you should move outside and move the mushroom cultivation inside. No, kind of. You start producing for sale. We have lots of woods, no room inside. Shiitake log operation outdoors with 3 different strains, and rotating those strains, especially with keeping in mind the soaking patterns have to be, if you're going to be producing consistently, there has to be some strategy to that. Oyster mushrooms are going to need some kind of climate control. I've tried to grow in a greenhouse with no heat. I mean, obviously it works for a little while, but then it gets either too hot or too cold. So even a little shed or something that's insulated, people are getting shipping containers, something inexpensive. But if you're not producing yet, Scotty and Donna, I would say that start small and fruit some of these oyster mushrooms out and get to know them before committing to doing something small scale commercial.
Yeah, that makes sense. Get acquainted. Well, George, thanks you for your suggestion on 5-gallon buckets. I think normally at this point in the presentation, you'd be hearing the applause and the thank yous for sharing your wisdom with us.
I can hear them. They're in my head.
Go ahead. Chad, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Usually like the carrier pigeon to my patio. It usually works good. Yeah, I'm old fashioned. That's the tweet, right? That's a tweet.
That's speaking of real old school. It's the merge of old school and new school, right?
That's a tweet from a carrier pigeon. No, yeah, you can reach me through Mushroom Mountain's got my contact information right on the site.
Great.
And I want to thank everybody for coming. So I hope you learned a lot. I had fun. Sorry, I've got a cold. I was sneezing and coughing a little bit, but.
Well, thank you for persevering and drinking your tea and keeping it going. We're so grateful to have you here. And y'all check out this recording. If you need to hear it again, you can always follow up on tips on Trad's website. We'll put a link to it in the chat. Thank you for watching. Thanks for attending the conference. And we hope you have a great day. And Trad, I hope you feel better. We'll see you tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. I'm good. See you later. Bye, everybody.